On a warm, muggy morning, May 23, 1934, a stolen 1934 Ford 58 came around a bend on a dusty Louisiana back road, doing maybe 65 miles an hour. Inside were the two most wanted fugitives in America. For 2.5 years, they had outrun every cop, every roadblock, every posse the country could throw at them. They had done it in one specific kind of car. And that morning, that same kind of car, a 1934 Ford 58, was hidden in the bushes just ahead of them, waiting. This is the story of how the fastest getaway car in America was finally beaten by an identical machine, 6 lawmen, and a betrayal nobody saw coming. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow killed 13 people, including 9 police officers, between 1932 and May 1934. For most of that time, they were essentially uncatchable, not because they were lucky, but because they were better equipped than the men chasing them. The Barrow gang stole and ran a string of Ford F8 sedans that were faster than most police vehicles on the road. The cops weren't slow, the criminals were just faster. The reason was one engine, a 221 cubic inch V8 that Henry Ford released in 1932 and sold to anyone with about $460. You'll see what that engine did. You'll see the letter Clyde supposedly wrote to Henry Ford himself. You'll meet the lawman Texas hired to end the chase and the firepower he brought to do it. And you'll see the grim irony at the very center of this story. In the end, the people who stopped Bonnie and Clyde did it driving the exact same car the outlaws loved. Clyde Barrow walked out of the Eastham prison farm in Texas in February 1932. He had served about 2 years for auto theft and burglary, and by every account from people who knew him, he came out a harder, colder, angrier man than he went in. Within months, he and Bonnie Parker were committing robberies. Before long, the gang had killed. In the spring of 1932, they were driving whatever they could steal, a Hudson here, a Chevrolet there. Those cars were not fast, and the cops chasing them in similar civilian sedans could mostly keep up. In those early months, Bonnie and Clyde were just 2 more small-time fugitives in the American Southwest. Then, in 1932, everything changed because Henry Ford put a V8 in a cheap car. Ford released the Model 18, the first affordable production car in America with a V8 engine. 221 cubic inches, around 65 horsepower, a top speed near 75 miles per hour off the dealer lot, and more with tuning. The starting price was around $460, roughly a third of what a Cadillac V8 cost. To Henry Ford, the V8 was a strategic gamble, his answer to Chevrolet. To a small-time criminal in Texas, it was something else entirely. The fastest production car you could steal. And here is the crucial part that is easy to miss. The Ford 58 was not just fast, it was fast, and it looked like every other car on the road. A bootlegger or a bank robber did not want a flashy Cadillac that turned heads. He wanted speed hidden inside an ordinary-looking sedan, and the Ford V8 delivered exactly that. As one historian put it, the 1934 Ford 58 was a criminal's dream. Fast, unassuming, and available everywhere. Bonnie and Clyde got their first Ford 58 in 1932, and from that point on, they essentially never drove anything else. Over the next 2 years, the gang stole somewhere between a dozen and a couple dozen of them, from driveways, gas stations, and parking lots. When a car got too hot, they would ditch it and steal another Ford V8, sometimes within hours. By 1933, the men hunting them could practically predict the make and model of the next car they would be chasing. The problem for the law was simple. The Bureau of Investigation, the Texas Rangers, the state police, the county sheriffs, they were mostly driving older, slower civilian sedans, bought on depression-strapped budgets. On a long stretch of open road, those cars could not catch a Ford 58. The law was already behind, and Bonnie and Clyde were already gone. Clyde Barrow didn't just steal Ford V8s, he drove them like almost no one else alive. Every serious account of the gang points to Clyde's genuinely exceptional driving. He'd grown up running back roads in rural Texas, and he knew mud holes, field crossings, and shortcuts that no pursuing officer could anticipate. He was famous for marathon drives, covering enormous distances in a single day, crossing state lines again and again to exploit a crucial weakness in the 1930s law enforcement. Police generally couldn't pursue across jurisdictional boundaries. Clyde would commit a crime in one state and be hundreds of miles away in another before nightfall. The V8 made it physically possible. His driving made it work. There are dozens of documented escapes. In June 1933, near Wellington, Texas, the gang ran their Ford off a road and down into a ravine. Bonnie was badly burned in the wreck, but they shot their way out of the local sheriff's custody, stole the sheriff's own car, and vanished. Months later, in Sowers, Texas, Dallas County officers set what they thought was a sealed roadblock. Clyde drove straight through it, taking gunfire but staying on the throttle, and was gone before the slower cars could react. That Sowers ambush matters because one of the officers who survived it, a deputy named Ted Hinton, learned a lesson that morning he never forgot. When it came to Bonnie and Clyde, there was no such thing as too much firepower. He'd remember that lesson at the end. In the spring of 1934 came one of the strangest documents in automotive history. A handwritten letter postmarked Tulsa, Oklahoma, dated April 10th, addressed to Henry Ford in Detroit. Ford Motor Company received it on April 13th. It was signed Clyde Champion Barrow, and it was, of all things, a fan letter, praising the very cars Clyde was using to outrun the law. While I still have got breath in my lungs, it read, I will tell you what a dandy car you make. I have drove Fords exclusively when I could get away with one. For sustained speed and freedom from trouble, the Ford has got every other car skinned. He even admitted his business hadn't been strictly legal. Now, there's genuine debate about this letter, and it's worth being honest about it. Handwriting analysts have questioned whether Clyde actually wrote it. And there's a tell. It's signed Clyde Champion Barrow, but his real middle name was Chestnut, which is one reason some experts doubt it. What's not in doubt is that the letter exists and lives today in the collection of the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. And here's the strangest twist. Around the same time, Henry Ford received a nearly identical praise letter signed by John Dillinger. That one was later examined and judged a forgery. The Barrow letter, uniquely, is still argued over to this day. Whether or not Clyde wrote it himself, the effect was the same. The most wanted criminals in America had become, in the public imagination, Henry Ford's most notorious endorsements. The numbers behind the gang's run are staggering. 13 killed, 9 of them officers, an estimated dozen to 20 stolen Fords, more than 100 robberies, routes crossing 16 states and, by some estimates, more than 10,000 miles in a single year, almost all of it in cars less than 2 years old and faster than what any cop was driving. If you are enjoying this, subscribe. There is a lot more of this kind of deep history coming on Badges and Chrome. By the spring of 1934, the government had run out of patience. The Bureau of Investigation had tried. The Texas Rangers had tried. Every sheriff between Dallas and Joplin had tried. None of them were going to catch Clyde Barrow in their old cars, so Texas hired one specific man. In February 1934, the Texas prison system brought in a 50-year-old retired Texas Ranger named Frank Hamer with the title of Special Investigator at a salary of about $180 a month. Hamer was a frontier-era legend, a former blacksmith who had joined the Rangers in 1905 and spent decades on the Texas-Mexico border. He had survived more than 50 gunfights and been wounded many times over. Sources credit him with killing somewhere between 53 and 70 men, though the exact number is disputed and likely grew in the retelling. What is not disputed is his reputation as one of the most relentless manhunters the country ever produced. Hamer's method was patience, not speed. He didn't chase the gang, he studied them. For 3 months he worked through reports, witness statements, and stolen car logs from 16 states, hunting for the patterns the gang didn't know they had. He noticed how they hugged the edges of states to exploit that jurisdiction problem. And he zeroed in on the people they trusted, including gang member Henry Methvin and his family in Louisiana. and Hamer understood the car problem intimately. He got himself a Ford V8 for the pursuit, and he said it plainly. Like Clyde Barrow, I used a Ford V8, and like Clyde, I lived in the car most of the time. The hunter deliberately matched the hunted's machine. Not every lawman could. One of the Texas deputies, Ted Hinton, the same man from the Sowers ambush, didn't have a fast car of his own and reportedly cycled through a series of disappointing vehicles, even a Cadillac, and at one point a gravel truck, just trying to find something that could keep up. That's how dominant the Ford V8 was. The law had to scramble for years just to find cars fast enough to lose to it more slowly. Here is the part that actually ended the chase, and it wasn't horsepower. Henry Methvin's family cut a deal. In exchange for a pardon for their son's crimes, they agreed to help Hamer set a trap. On the morning of May 23, 1934, Methvin's father, Ivy, parked his logging truck on the side of a remote road near Gibbsland, Louisiana, jacked up with a tire removed as if he'd broken down. It was bait, and it was designed to exploit the one thing that could stop a Ford V8, getting the driver to slow down on his own. 6 lawmen were concealed in the brush. 4 from Texas, Hamer, Maney Galt, Bob Alcorn, and Ted Hinton, and 2 from Louisiana, Bienville Parish Sheriff Henderson Jordan and Deputy Prentice Oakley. They had been waiting, by some accounts, for 2 days. That morning, Bonnie and Clyde reportedly stopped for breakfast at a cafe in Gibbsland, a takeout sandwich Bonnie was still holding when they died. A few miles south, Clyde recognized Ivy Methvin's truck and, seeing what looked like a stranded friend, slowed his stolen Ford to a stop. And this is the point worth sitting with. The gang's speed never came into play at all. The fastest getaway car in America rolled to a gentle halt, not because anyone outdrove it, but because of intelligence, patience, and a betrayal. Clyde took his foot off the gas himself. What happened next was not a gunfight. It was an execution by ambush, and the firepower tells you exactly how terrified the law was of these two. The posse was armed for war. Hamer carried a semi-automatic Remington Model 8 rifle. He had specially ordered a 20-round magazine for it specifically for this hunt, and had chosen the rifle because he knew from Clyde's own ditched cars that it could punch straight through a Ford's steel body. Hinton, the man who had learned at Sowers that there was no such thing as too much firepower, carried a Colt Monitor, a law enforcement version of the Browning automatic rifle, on loan from the Texas National Guard. The rest carried more BRs, shotguns, and pistols. When Clyde's car stopped, the posse opened fire. They emptied the rifles, then picked up shotguns, then emptied those, then drew their pistols, firing roughly 130 rounds into the car in a sustained barrage. The shooting lasted only a matter of seconds. Bonnie and Clyde never got out. They were killed almost instantly. One of the very first shots through the windshield hit Clyde in the head. When it was over, Hamer approached the bullet-riddled Ford holding a .38 Super Pistol, a round he had chosen because, like the rifle, it would punch through the car body if either fugitive somehow still had breath to fight. Neither did. Here's a detail most people never learn. The death car wasn't even Bonnie and Clyde's. It was a nearly new 1934 Ford 5.8 Deluxe four-door sedan that Clyde had stolen on April 29th from the driveway of Jesse and Ruth Warren in Topeka, Kansas, barely 3 weeks before the ambush. After the shooting, the Ford was towed away, and the Bienville Parish Sheriff reportedly tried to keep it for himself. But the Warrens were the car's rightful owners, and they sued to get it back. When the bullet-torn Ford was finally returned to them in August 1934, it was still, in the words of a family member, a bloody mess. The car would change hands many times over the decades, and be careful here because this trips people up. Several fake death cars toured the country claiming to be the real one. But the authentic vehicle survives today, on display in Nevada, where visitors come to count the bullet holes. By some estimates, as many as 167 of them were tallied across the body, the damage concentrated on the front and passenger side, exactly where the posse's fire poured in. Step back from the ambush for a moment, because the Bonnie and Clyde story is really a turning point in the history of the police car itself, and that's the part that almost never gets told. Think about what this whole chase exposed. For 2.5 years, two criminals in a stolen Ford had humiliated every level of American law enforcement, local sheriffs, state police, even the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And they had done it for one simple, mechanical reason. Their car was faster than the cars the police were driving. And the reason for that comes down to how police bought cars in the early 1930s. Departments in that era were not ordering purpose-built pursuit vehicles. There was no such thing yet. A sheriff's office bought whatever cheap civilian sedan its depression-gutted budget could afford, and sent it out exactly as it came from the showroom. No heavy-duty suspension, no upgraded cooling, no performance tuning. Worse, many departments were still running tired, older cars from the 1920s. So you had a situation that was almost absurd. The criminal and the cop could walk into the very same Ford dealership, but the criminal bought the new Ford 5.8, and the cop was stuck nursing along whatever his county had bought years earlier. The outlaw, spending stolen money, was better equipped than the officer spending the taxpayers. Frank Hamer understood this instinctively, and his solution was telling. He did not ask for a better gun first, he asked for a Ford 5.8. He matched the criminal's machine because he understood that in a car chase, the car is the weapon. He essentially became a one-man preview of an idea that American policing would take another 2 decades to adopt at scale. That catching fast criminals requires deliberately buying fast, properly equipped cars, not whatever happens to be cheapest on the lot. And that idea, born of frustration on 1,000 dusty roads in the Bonnie and Clyde era, is exactly what eventually produced the factory police car. When Ford introduced the first true factory police package in 1950, with its heavy-duty springs, bigger cooling, and upgraded electrical system, it was answering a problem this chase had laid bare 16 years earlier. That an ordinary car sent out to do police work against a determined and well-mounted criminal simply was not good enough. The pursuit cars we've covered in other Badges and Chrome episodes. The factory packages, the interceptors, the purpose-built CHP machines, all trace part of their DNA back to moments exactly like this one, when the law learned the hard way that horsepower was no longer optional. In a strange way then, Bonnie and Clyde helped build the modern police car. Not on purpose, obviously, but every time their stolen Ford 5.8 left a squad car choking in the dust, it added to a growing, undeniable argument inside American law enforcement. We need better cars. The era of the police department making do with a plain civilian sedan was ending, and chases like this one were the reason. So go back to that warm Louisiana morning and the irony at the heart of it. For 2.5 years, the only thing on the road that could reliably run with a Ford 5.8 was another Ford 5.8. And it took the United States government that entire time and 9 dead officers before the men hunting Bonnie and Clyde were finally driving the same machine. Frank Hamer matched their car exactly. He even lived in it the way Clyde did, but in the end, the car did not catch them at all. The fastest getaway car in America was beaten not by a faster one, but by patience, by intelligence, and by a father standing next to a jacked-up truck. The speed that had kept Bonnie and Clyde alive for 2.5 years never even got a chance to matter. They slowed down on their own, and the trap closed. The 1934 Ford was the perfect getaway car. It just could not outrun a betrayal. This is Badges and Chrome, the channel that covers the police car's history almost forgot. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.